Thomas the Tank Engine and Friends, Wooden Railway Adventures, Episode 166. Greetings, Montague. The island of Sodor was still trying to recover from the damage left by Diesel 10 a few months earlier, and the engines were working very hard to stay caught up on their jobs. The Elsbridge platform had finally been repaired, and Duck was scheduled to bring some passengers to the station on the day of the reopening. It will be a marvelous ceremony, Sir Topham Hatt told the engines that night. There will be fireworks, a brass band, and food. Oh, yes, lots of food. Like he needs any more of that, chuckled James to himself. I heard that, said Sir Topham Hatt, and because of that snarky comment, James, you will take trucks to Great Waterton instead of joining in on the celebration. Oh, bother, groaned James. I need to learn to keep my mouth shut sometimes. Indeed, said Toby. We are eager for the platform to reopen, sir, just in time for the summer travelers, too. Duck was very proud of the fact that he got to bring the passengers to the reopening. He brought his coach to Knapford Station early the next morning and quickly set off for Elsbridge. Unfortunately, the journey took longer than expected, and Duck rushed in as fast as he could as to not be late. He overshot the platform and crashed into some cargo cars full of food. Toby and Daisy chuckled at Duck's mishap. "Oh, no, the food!" cried Sir Topham Hatt. Duck, you have caused confusion and delay. Your front is damaged and must be repaired. It's off to the works for you again." Duck was embarrassed and felt incredibly silly for making such a foolish mistake. To fill Duck's absence, Percy went and helped Oliver on the Little Western. Thomas and Toby tried to split Percy's duties between themselves, but it was no use. Daisy saw what was going on and told Sir Topham Hatt right away. "They say the extra work doesn't bother them, sir, but they're exhausted by the end of the day. You need to find a way to lighten the load." "Indeed," said Sir Topham Hatt. "I don't know how long Duck will be gone, so I best find an engine to help temporarily. Thank you, Daisy." A few days later, the new engine arrived at Elsbridge Station. He was purple and wore the letters that read GNR. "He's from the Great Northern Railway," whispered Toby to Thomas. "I've heard some good things from up there." "What's so good?" asked Thomas. "The engines are well maintained and work very hard," said Toby. "But the problem is—" "Hello, Sodor," said the engine. "I can tackle this branch line with no trouble at all." "They're very confident, to say the least," murmured Toby. "Overconfident would be correct," said Daisy. "This engine's going to be a handful." "My name's Ryan," said the engine boldly. "I'm looking for the Fat Controller." "That would be me," said Sir Topham Hatt. "But please, call me—" "Oh, dear me," said Ryan. "This platform is in terrible shape. I'm afraid I won't be able to pull my coaches here with such a rustic building scaring away my passengers." Toby was cross. He and the pack had worked hard to repair the Elsbridge platform. "Excuse me, Ryan," said Sir Topham Hatt, "but we do not speak that way about our stations here on Sodor. In fact, this platform was just rebuilt a few days ago." "If you say so," said Ryan brashly. Daisy was horrified. "Watch your mouth," she said crossly. "You're speaking to Sir Topham Hatt here." "My apologies, sir. I'd heard good things about Sodor, but I didn't expect to see such a distasteful piece of—" "That's enough," said Sir Topham Hatt calmly. "Ryan, I know you are young and inexperienced, but—" "On the contrary," interrupted Ryan, "I'm quite spirited and wise, if I may say so myself." "Well, don't say it anyway," grumbled Thomas. Sir Topham Hatt sighed heavily. "Anyway," he continued, "you will be filling in for Duck until he returns." "Excellent," said Ryan. "Where do I pick up his coaches?" The engines chuckled. "Oh, no," laughed Sir Topham Hatt. "Percy is pulling Duck's passengers right now, so you'll be taking freight trains here on Thomas's branch line." Ryan was horrified. "What an outrage!" he cried. Sorry, I have to go now," said Sir Topham Hatt quickly, and he walked away. "Oh dear, what was I thinking?" Ryan turned to the other engines. "Can you believe him? I will not stand for this injustice. Did you see how that fat man insulted me?" I can't imagine why," replied Daisy, and she rolled away. Thomas and Toby could immediately tell that Ryan was going to be a handful. They described his nervy attitude to the other engines. "See," said Oliver, "you always complain Duck is aggravating, but look at his replacement." Gordon wasn't so intimidated. "I'm not scared of this new engine, and I'll show you all tomorrow," he said proudly. The next day, Gordon buffered up to his coaches as Ryan was preparing to leave with a freight train. "You must be the new engine. I'm Gordon, the fastest and proudest engine on Sodor." "Not as fast as Spencer," said Ryan bluntly. This took Gordon by surprise. "Oh, well, how do you know about Spencer? You just got here." "Diesel told me everything last night," replied Ryan. "Since there weren't any open berths in the shed, I spent the night with him, and we had a nice long talk about all of you engines." "Diesel is the last engine you want to be talking to," said Gordon. "He's nothing but trouble." "Whatever," said Ryan indifferently. "Duck will be back soon, and I'll get to leave right after that. By the way, is it true that Duck's real name is Montague? Diesel mentioned it to me, but I wasn't sure." I suppose it is," said Gordon, "but nobody calls him that. Duck is just fine." "Then it's settled," said Ryan. "Montague it is," and he puffed out of the station. "That engine certainly has a mouth on him," said Edward. For the rest of the day, Ryan went around Sodor asking when Montague would be back. Some engines, like Bill and Ben, didn't know who he was talking about. Others, like Boko, tried to straighten Ryan out. "Your cheeky attitude and your bold words will get you into trouble," he told Ryan. "Have some respect for these engines, and they'll respect you in return." "There are two ways of doing things," said Ryan. "The Great Northern Way or the wrong way. And I'm Great Northern, and—" "Where did you hear that?" asked Henry. "That's Duck's favorite line to say." "You mean Montague," said Ryan dismissively, "and Diesel told it to me. He said it would make a great motto, and I have to agree." The engines were losing patience with Ryan, and were ready for him to leave. At last, Duck finally returned from the works a few days later. His friends were overjoyed to see him. "At last," cried Stanley. "Now that new engine can leave and return to the South or wherever he came from." "I'll help him pack his suitcase," said Percy. "He needs to be gone before the day is up." "What's going on?" asked Duck. "What happened while I was gone?" The engines explained the situation. "His name's Ryan," said Arthur. "He's overconfident and inexperienced." "He's got a bigger attitude than me," exclaimed James, "and that's saying something." Duck chuckled. "Sounds like an engine from the Great Northern Railway. I'll go sort this one out." The next day he found Ryan getting ready to take a train. "Ah, greetings, Montague. So happy to have you back here again." "Stop it," said Duck firmly. "You've been rude to my friends and my controller, and I hope you know I don't stand for this nonsense." Said Ryan quietly. "Diesel was right about you after all. Diesel is a lazy shunter who finds any excuse to complain. I suppose that's why you two are friends, after all." Ryan was shocked. "Don't you dare talk to me that way, Montague. It's Duck, and don't you dare ever treat my friends that way again." "Waddle wheels," muttered Ryan under his breath. Duck was coupled up to his train. "There are two ways of doing things, the Great Western Way or the Great Northern Way." Ryan laughed. "You got it wrong, silly. The second line is the wrong way, as in the Great Northern Way is the wrong way." He suddenly stopped talking. "My point exactly," smiled Duck, "and that's Mr. Waddle Wheels to you." And he puffed away, leaving a very silent and humiliated Ryan behind. Thomas the Tank Engine and Friends, Wooden Railway Adventures, Episode 167, Stafford's Electric Slide. Ryan, a visiting engine from the Great Northern Railway, was causing heaps of trouble on the island of Sodor. He was making life very difficult for the other engines. "Why is that root engine still here?" asked Stepney one morning. "Wasn't he supposed to leave when Duck returned from the works?" "Duck has been back for a while now," remarked Murdoch. "It should be any day now." "I don't like Ryan at all," said Mavis quietly. "He's been more of a hindrance than help." Murdoch sighed. "If I see Sir Topham Hatt today, I'll try and mention it to him. All the engines I've talked to are cross with Ryan as well, and it's about time he left." Murdoch puffed away to pull a goods train. Later that day, as he neared Sudbury Station, Ryan raced along the adjacent line and plowed into the back of Murdoch's train. The freight cars tumbled off the line and took Murdoch with them. "You foolish engine!" cried Murdoch unhappily. "Watch where you're going for once, will you?" Ryan didn't mean to crash into Murdoch's train, but he realized he had made a big mistake. "Oh, I'll go get help," he said as he backed away quickly. Rocky was helping Harvey with another accident when Ryan buffered up to him. "Where are you taking me?" asked Rocky. "You better watch my crane arm. I've heard some not-so-nice things about you." Ryan was cross at the treatment he was receiving from the other engines and didn't care what happened to Rocky. As he neared the crash site, he didn't see Scruff stopped on top of the Suttery Bridge. Rocky's crane arm hit Scruff and pushed him over the edge. "Ouch, that hurt," complained Scruff. "What was that for?" "He's trying to fix the first accident he caused by creating a second one," shouted Murdoch. "Typical GNR locomotives." The engines were fuming, and Ryan was causing a considerable amount of confusion. Sir Topham Hatt spoke to him sternly that night. "Scruff has been damaged and must leave for repairs," he said crossly. "There is nobody but yourself to blame for the mess you created today. I wanted to keep you for a while in hopes of teaching you some manners, but accidents like this are unacceptable. I shall have to find someone to shunt in the yard while Scruff is away." Ryan felt bad, but was certain that the Sodor engines were to blame as well. Scruff's replacement arrived the next day and quickly set to work in the yard. "He seems like a good fellow," remarked Donald. "That's what we thought about Ryan, too," said Whiff, "and look how much trouble he's caused for us." Sir Topham Hatt was watching the new engine from a distance. "His name is Stafford. He's an electric shunter, and I think he will surprise you all." And the engines were surprised. The trains were on time, and Stafford did his work without fuss. Soon all of the engines were impressed, even Scruff. "Looks like you can handle the yard here just fine," he said to Stafford when he returned. "I've been wanting to transfer to Whiff's waste dump on Edwards Branch Line for quite some time now, and you're the perfect engine to take my place." "Oh, you're too kind," chuckled Stafford. "Do you think Sir Topham Hatt will let me stay?" "He better," replied Scruff. "He probably isn't going to keep both you and Ryan on Sodor, so he'll most likely send one of you away. But that's not a hard decision in my opinion. Ryan has been a disaster, to say the least." Ryan had overheard Scruff's words and became crosser than ever. He spoke to Diesel the next day about the situation. "How absurd," said Diesel. "What sort of madman is Sir Topham Hatt? Bringing two engines to Sodor to fight over the same job?" "The engines already like him better than me," muttered Ryan angrily. "I don't want to go back to the GNR just yet, but Sir Topham Hatt has practically shown me the door. Oh, what am I to do? Diesel, you have to help me. You've been here a long time. You're wise and experienced. You must have some grand advice." Diesel found Ryan's compliments to be very flattering. "Don't worry," he said. "The solution really is a simple one. That new engine can't work if he's caught up in an accident. So all you have to do is—" "Yes, that's brilliant," agreed Ryan hastily. "Stafford won't look very useful if he's caught up in an accident. Then I'll prove to Sir Topham Hatt that I deserve to stay more than him. Thank you, Diesel." Ryan puffed away and Diesel was left alone. "I should give out advice more often," he said to himself. A few days later, Stafford brought a train into Ellsworth Station to take to the docks. Ryan realized that this was his chance. "Stafford," he moaned, "I'm not feeling too well. Can you take this train instead of me?" "Sorry, I can't," replied Stafford. "I'm not meant for pulling trains. Shunting in the yard is all that I'm supposed to do." "Suit yourself," said Ryan, "but I'm sure Sir Topham Hatt would be impressed to see you pulling such a magnificent train as this one. I'll work in the yard today instead, and you can take my cars." Stafford was still hesitant, but reluctantly agreed. "I do want to impress Sir Topham Hatt so that I can stay," he murmured to himself, and he ran around to the front and was coupled to the trucks. "Psst," whispered Ryan. "If you bump Stafford when he gets to the docks, you can bump me some other time as well. I promise." The trucks liked this idea. "Getting to bump two engines in a row, that's a great deal. We'll do it for you." Stafford set off with the trucks and Ryan was left alone. "Silly Stafford," he muttered. "Those trucks will have him off the rails in no time." Meanwhile, Sir Topham Hatt and some engines were saying goodbye to Victor. His ship was finally leaving after being stuck at the docks for many months. "Thank you for your hospitality, sir," said Victor. "It has been a pleasure to see your magnificent railway." "Come back and visit any time," cried Rosie. "Take care," shouted Neville, "and watch out when you leave. The ocean can be a dangerous place, you know." Just then, Stafford rounded the bend. He was wildly out of control, and the trucks pushed him over the points. Despite his best efforts, Stafford plunged into the sea, right into the side of Victor's boat. "Or watch out for runaway engines," said Neville cheekily. Victor's boat had sprung a leak due to the contact, and a tugboat pushed it back to the docks. Stafford felt extremely silly that the trucks had overpowered him. "What are you doing here, Stafford?" asked Sir Topham Hatt. "You're supposed to be shunting at Knapford, not pulling these troublesome trucks to the docks." "I switched jobs with Ryan," said Stafford sadly. "He never mentioned anything about the trucks pushing me all the way here. I just wanted to impress you, sir." Sir Topham Hatt soon realized that Stafford wasn't at fault. He quickly found Ryan and reprimanded him severely. "Switching jobs with Stafford was never your decision," he said angrily. "I am the controller of this railway, and I have the final say on all things that happen here. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir," murmured Ryan. "But it's not my fault that Stafford doesn't know how to pull trucks. Any engine with coal in his bunker knows how to do that. You know just as well as I do that Stafford is a shunter who has never pulled trucks before," said Sir Topham Hatt crossly. "The seawater has ruined his mechanics and battery, so he will have to be sent to the works. First it was Murdoch, then Scruff, and now Stafford. You're racking up quite a number of engines in need of repairs." Ryan looked away, trying to ignore what Sir Topham Hatt was telling him. "I don't know how they run things on the Great Northern Railway," continued Sir Topham Hatt, "but here on Sodor, if you disobey me, you don't get to stay very long." Ryan pretended he hadn't heard. His plan about Stafford had backfired miserably, and now he was even in more trouble with Sir Topham Hatt than before. Diesel had tricked him, he had been directly responsible for 3 damaged engines, and the controller of the Sodor Railway was threatening to send him packing. It was going to be a tense few days for Ryan, indeed. Thomas the Tank Engine and Friends, Wooden Railway Adventures, Episode 168, Scottish Blues. One morning, Douglas brought his trucks into Tidmouth Station. Some children were standing off to the side, waiting for another train. "Look!" cried the boy. "It's one of the Scottish twins! Hello, Donald!" "Yes, indeed!" cheered the girl. "Hi, Donald! How is your duck doing?" Douglas became cross. "I'm not Donald," he cried. "Read my nameplate, would ya?" And he puffed quickly away. The children hadn't meant to call Douglas the wrong name on purpose. It was an honest mistake. Still, Douglas was insulted and was sulking when he met Edward at a switch. "What's the matter with you?" he asked kindly. "You've got that Scottish scowl I've seen on Donald before." "Why you have to mention my twin?" groaned Douglas. "That's all everybody talks about nowadays." Edward was confused. "What's wrong, Douglas? You're certainly bothered by something." Douglas sighed. "Some children confused me with Donald this morning. Thinking back on it, I was rather rude to them. It just makes me a wee bit mad when people think I'm Donald, not me real self." Just then, Gator puffed by. "Hello, Edward. Hello, Donald," he called. "Nice day, isn't it?" "Cinders and ashes!" cried Douglas. "Apparently the engines have forgotten me name, too." Edward chuckled. "Don't be too hard on Gator. He's a new engine. But you have to understand the situation from our point of view. You and Donald look very much alike. That's what twins are. Just like Ari and Bert and Max and Monty. Nobody would call you the wrong name on purpose." "I suppose you're right," said Douglas. "I just wish there was some way to distinguish myself from Donald. Then it would make things easier for the other engines." On the other side of the island, Donald was having the same problem too. When he arrived at Marin Station, the same 2 children from earlier were there as well. "Oh, hello there," said the girl. "We're sorry we called you the wrong name earlier." "We didn't realize you were Douglas instead of Donald," agreed the boy. "We'll try harder to make sure we get your name right in the future." Donald was horrified. "What are you mumbling about?" he asked quickly. "I'm Donald, not me brother Douglas. Look, me number on me tender says 9. Dougie is 10. Can't you read my nameplate either?" The children stared blankly back at Donald. "Sorry," they said, "but we haven't learned to read yet." Donald rolled his eyes and puffed quickly away. He found Oliver later that afternoon. "It's a pity," he said sadly, "that you can't distinguish one engine from another. You don't think I look like me brother Dougie, do ya?" "Well," said Oliver cautiously, "you both are twins and the same type of engine. Sometimes when I pull into Knapford Station and you two are there, I can't tell who's who until one of you speaks." Donald was sad. "No other engine on Sodor has this problem. I need to go discuss this with Douglas." That night, the Scottish twins talked about what to do. "I'm tired of being mistaken for you," said Donald. "And I'm tired of being mistaken for you," agreed Douglas. "We need to distinguish ourselves somehow," continued Donald. "That way, nobody will mess up our names again." "What about our whistles?" asked Douglas. "Your whistle is just a copy of mine. You should change it." "You don't say," cried Donald. "It's your whistle that copies my whistle. Why should I have to change it when I've had it longer?" "You haven't had it longer," exclaimed Douglas. "We got them at the same time, but I've made the whistle famous. My passengers will be sad when they don't hear my familiar sound when I pull into the station." "You don't have any passengers, Dougie," cried Donald. "Nobody will care if your whistle changes." "Then you change it first," retorted Douglas. The twins argued the rest of the night and into the morning. They were still disagreeing when Ryan arrived with some tankers. "Oh, would you both shut it?" he shouted. "You're making a mess over nothing. Just one of you get a new paint color or something. Then it will be very easy to tell who's who." The twins went from being shocked by Ryan's bluntness to very pleased with the idea. "Nobody will confuse us if we're painted different colors," said Douglas. "We used to be painted blue many years ago," said Donald. "Remember those days, Dougie? Ah, that color of blue was nice, but black seemed to suit us more. That's why we switched back." "Then it's settled," agreed Douglas. "You'll get a new coat of paint so that we won't be confused anymore." "Hold your tender," said Donald crossly. "I'm not changing me color. You're the one complaining about engines mistaking me for you. It will be double trouble if they still call you Donald, and I'm the one with the new paint job." "Losh sakes, this is impossible," cried Douglas, and the two continued to argue. Soon Boko was tired of the constant complaining and went to go settle it himself. "So you both want to be different," he said to the twins, "but none of you want to change." "That's correct," said Donald. "We're stubbornly Scottish, to say the least." Boko sighed. "Well, that's obviously a very big problem. One of you needs to get painted blue like before, and one of you needs to stay black in order to stop this confusion. I'll tell Sir Topham Hatt that you'll have your decision in the morning." Donald and Douglas were eager for a change, but neither of them wanted to be the one to do it. They were still bickering that night in the sheds, and Toad was getting frustrated.
"Excuse me, Mr. Donald and Mr. Douglas, but nothing's going to change if both of you continue to be stubborn about this. Maybe this decision is more troublesome than the actual solution."
The twins thought about what Toad had said. "Maybe he's right," said Douglas. "Come to think of it, I don't mind being called Donald once in a while. When I haven't seen you all day, it's a nice reminder of me twin brother. And it's not so terrible to be mistaken for me famous Scottish twin either," agreed Donald. "At least they don't call us Bill and Ben." Douglas laughed. "Now that would be embarrassing," he chuckled. "But what are we going to do?" asked Donald. "Sir Topham Hatt's already ordered the blue paint, and he expects one of us to change colors tomorrow." "Maybe," said Douglas, "if the paint is accidentally misplaced, then nobody will have to change colors at all." "Ah, I like it," chuckled Donald. "We have a history of misplacing things, if you get my meaning." The twins agreed to go through with the plan. The next morning, Sir Topham Hatt and Boko were waiting in the yard for Donald and Douglas. The paint had arrived and the painters were ready to go. "It will be strange seeing one of the Scottish twins painted blue again," murmured Boko. "A sight like that hasn't been seen in many years." "I agree," said Sir Topham Hatt, "but if this case of mistaken identity between the two is getting out of hand, I suppose this is the only way to fix it." Just then Donald and Douglas puffed in. "We're here, sir," cried Donald. "Excellent," said Sir Topham Hatt. "And which one of you is going to become the blue Scottish engine?" But the twins weren't listening. Donald bumped the paint car onto the intersection. Just then, Ryan rushed over the hill and smashed into the car, sending it off the rails. "Losh sakes!" cried Douglas. "Can you believe it? All of the blue paint is ruined." "How terrible," remarked Donald. "It looks like no engine can be repainted after all. Sorry, sir." Sir Topham Hatt looked at the twins and realized their sneaky plan. "Indeed," he murmured slowly. "Unfortunate is the right word. Well, if there's no blue paint, then there will be no new blue engines, I'm afraid. Continue with your work, you two." The twins were very happy that their plan had worked. Meanwhile, Ryan was cross that he had crashed into the car and splattered paint everywhere. "Aye, you over there!" cried Douglas. "Watch where you're going, would you?" "Look at the mess you made, Brian!" shouted Donald. "Be more careful next time." "It's Ryan, not Brian," he said crossly. "Oh, my mistake," chuckled Donald. "You know, it really is quite easy to get two names mixed up." And the Scottish engines puffed away back to their jobs. Thomas the Tank Engine and Friends, Wooden Railway Adventures, Episode 169, The Importance of Being Billy.
"Do you know what?"
asked Billy one morning. "What?" grunted Gordon.
"Do you know what?"
he restated. "What is he mumbling about?" asked Paxton. "Don't give him much thought," said Derek. "He does this when he's about to complain about something."
"It's about time that I got an important job," continued Billy. "I'm tired of pulling the random trains that nobody else wants to pull. I deserve something special. I want a branch line."
"Huh," laughed Gordon. "And what makes you so deserving of a branch line? You don't know the slightest thing about coaches."
"But I do," protested Billy. "I pulled the railway inspector around a few months ago, and I passed with flying colors."
"I think the railway inspector was more preoccupied with something else that day," said Paxton. "Like inspecting the railway," agreed Gordon.
"Still," continued Billy, "I can handle the big jobs. After all, I'm Billy, the pride of the railway."
"More like pride of the coal depot," chuckled Derek. Gordon couldn't stop laughing. "Silly tank engines," he muttered. "When will you all learn that the important jobs are left to us tender engines? We are reliable, on time, and most importantly, really useful." Gordon puffed away to pull the express. Billy was still focused on getting a new job. "You know," said Paxton, "doing odd jobs around the island isn't such a bad thing. That means that Sir Topham Hatt thinks you're reliable, and no matter what the train, you'll get the job done correctly." But Billy wasn't convinced. "I deserve something better than zoo cars," he said crossly. "I've been on this island a long time, and I want an important job." "Hey, what's so wrong with the zoo cars?" asked Derek. "Sure, they smell bad, but I quite enjoy pulling them." Billy puffed away, and Paxton and Derek were left alone. "This won't turn out well," murmured Paxton. "Better get the breakdown train ready," chuckled Derek. Meanwhile, Billy was still riled up from Gordon's comments. "I can do anything that Gordon can," he said fearlessly, "except pull the express, because that's heavy, and goods trains. Those are heavy too. But I can spin around on the turntable like Gordon. Yes, look at me, just like Gordon." "Oh, what are those?" Some baggage cars were sitting on the platform at Knapford Station, and no engine was to be seen. "Looks like somebody needs to take that train," smiled Billy. "I can do that and prove to everyone that I'm just as important as the big engines." Billy ran over to the cars and immediately puffed away out of the station. Just then, Rosie pulled in with her passengers. Their luggage had been dropped off at the station by another engine before they arrived, but now the baggage cars were gone. "Where's our luggage?" demanded the passengers. "We can't go anywhere without our suitcases." "I'm sorry," said Rosie, "but I don't know what happened to them." The passengers were cross and began saying what a bad railway it was. At the sound of the first complaint, Sir Topham Hatt was out of his office trying to control the crowd. Nobody knew that Billy had taken the cars back to the airport. Jeremy was very surprised when he arrived. "No need to thank me," said Billy confidently. "Just doing my part to help the island of Sodor. Have a nice day, Jeremy." "What is that orange engine mumbling about?" asked Jeremy. "These baggage cars belong to Rosie's passengers, not back here at the airport where they just came from. Oh, this will cause confusion and delay for sure." Meanwhile, Billy was very proud of himself for supposedly helping the passengers. As he passed through Henry's tunnel, he nearly ran into a honey car sitting on the line. "What's this doing here?" asked Billy. "I should move it before somebody runs into it." "I wouldn't do that if I were you," cautioned Trevor. "The vicar will be back soon with more bees, and they'll be cross if you take their honey." Billy was determined to make things right, however. He tried pushing the car out of the way, but realized that honey was leaking onto the track, and that the wheels were stuck. "I'll have to give this car a big shove then," said Billy, and he backed up to the curve and gave it a huge bump. The honey car quickly became derailed and angry bees swarmed everywhere. "Well, at least it's out of the way. No need to thank me, Trevor," and Billy puffed away. "You silly engine!" cried Trevor. "What am I supposed to do with all of these angry bees?" Just then, Thomas raced down the track and collided with the car. The bees swarmed at him and chased him down the line. "Phew, that was a close call," said Billy. "Oh my goodness, what is wrong with Sodor today? Everybody is leaving important trains unattended in the strangest areas. Well, I suppose I'll have to move this one as well." Billy puffed up to the fish cars and pulled them out of the way. Just then, Salty and Arthur rolled in. "And here is me present, Arthur," said Salty happily. "I want to thank ye for your hard work at the docks these past few weeks. And so here's a train full of your favorite thing." Arthur looked curiously at the scrap cars behind Salty. Thanks," he said, "but those aren't my favorite things." "Of course it is," said Salty happily. "Every time I look at one of these cars, I'm immediately reminded of me good friend, Arthur." Arthur was appalled. "I remind you of Scrap?" he asked sadly. "Scrap? Of course not, me hearty," chuckled Salty. "What do those cars look like to you?" They look like scrap cars to me," said Arthur. Salty was confused. "You think those fish cars remind you of Scrap?" "Those aren't fish cars, Salty. Those are scrap cars." Salty looked behind him. "Oh, shiver me timbers!" he cried. "Where did me precious fish go? It was a present for ye, Arthur, but they've disappeared." Arthur was confused. "So you got me scrap cars instead?" he asked again. Salty attempted to explain the situation, but it was no use. Meanwhile, Billy was very satisfied with the day's work. "I've been extremely productive," he said to himself. "I delivered those baggage cars to the airport, I moved a honey car out of the way, and those fish cars were so smelly that I had to take them out of the docks. Now I can finally relax." Just then, Rosie and Salty arrived with Sir Topham Hatt. All three looked very cross. "Billy," shouted Sir Topham Hatt, "what have you done today?" "Quite a lot, sir," said Billy. "Would you like to hear about it?" "No, I would not," said Sir Topham Hatt crossly. "You stole luggage from Rosie's passengers, you misplaced Salty's gift to Arthur, and Thomas crashed into the honey you spilled near Trevor's field." "My passengers don't have any luggage," said Rosie. "And Arthur thinks that I want to scrap him," said Salty crossly. Billy realized he had made a big mistake. "I was just trying to be helpful," he said sadly. "I guess I really messed up today, sir, didn't I?" Sir Topham Hatt sighed. "Yes, you messed up today, Billy, but I do have to say I'm very pleased with your work ethic. You were all over the island trying to make it a better place, and that deserves praise. Just next time, make sure you ask another engine where they want their train to go. Is that understood?" "Oh, yes, sir, it is, sir," said Billy. He was feeling much better already. "Ah, bees, get off me!" cried Thomas as he raced down the line. The next day, Billy arrived at Knapford Station to see the big engines pull away with their trains. "I heard you were very busy yesterday," chuckled Gordon. "Do you still want that branch line you were talking about?" "No, thanks," said Billy. "Some other engine can have it." "What do you mean?" asked Gordon. "Who doesn't want their own branch line?" "I guess I don't. After yesterday's adventure, I can finally say that I've realized the vital importance of being Billy." And with that, Billy puffed out of Knapford Station, a wiser and smarter engine. Thomas the Tank Engine and Friends, Wooden Railway Adventures, Episode 170, Truckus Ruckus. The yard was a busy and chaotic place after Stafford left for the works. A few weeks earlier, he had been pushed into the ocean by some troublesome trucks and sent for repairs. The engines were crossed because they had to fetch their own trains until he got back. "This is absurd," complained Ryan. "Proper engines like us shouldn't have to fetch our trains. They should be waiting for us at the platform when we arrive. Am I right?" The engines were still irritated with Ryan's brash behavior. "Yes, it's a valid point," said Percy, "but that's not the case right now, so we should just move on. I heard Stafford will be back very soon." "I know what we should do," exclaimed Ryan loudly. "We should go on strike." "Oh, dear," mumbled Toby. "Yes, it's a perfect idea. All of us engines should go sit in the sheds and refuse to pull our trains until we find a new shunter. That will prove to Sir Topham Hatt that we are important and deserve respect." Edward chuckled. "You know, Ryan, I once heard a story about some engines that went on strike. They thought they were very smart in the beginning, but soon realized that Sir Topham Hatt would only find other engines to do their jobs." "Right," said Percy, "and if I remember correctly, Sir Topham Hatt brought in a small green tank engine to run Thomas's branch line, while he pulled the big trains." Percy and Edward smiled at each other. "But the best part is," continued Edward, "the engines that went on strike were Gordon, Henry, and—" "I think we've heard enough," interrupted James. "Moral of the story, Ryan, don't go on strike. It's a bad idea." "How do you know?" asked Ryan. "We can't be sure unless we try." "You don't need to try," said James. "It's not going to end well, that's for sure." James scurried away with his coaches, and the engines were left alone. "What was his problem?" asked Ryan crossly. "He's in a foul mood." "He probably doesn't want to be reminded of the time he went on strike with Gordon and Henry," chuckled Toby, "and the three were forced to stay in the sheds until they agreed to shunt their own trains." "Oh, I get it," said Ryan. "But whatever happened to that green tank engine that came to help?" "He was scrapped, I'm afraid," said Edward quickly. "Indeed," smiled Percy. "He spent too much time trying to figure out ways to avoid his work, and Sir Topham Hatt sent him to the scrapyard." Ryan was shocked. "Oh, dear," he said. "Well, I'd better get back to work, and if Sir Topham Hatt asks, I wasn't planning a strike or anything like it." And Ryan rushed away. Percy, Edward, and Toby laughed at his inexperience. A few days later, Stafford finally returned, and with another familiar face in tow. "Look!" shouted Fred. "Is that who I think it is?" Stafford rolled in and quickly dropped Rickety off at the yard. "Welcome back, Rickety," said the trucks. They had missed their good friend. "Oh, it's nice to be back," said Rickety happily. "It's hard to cause trouble at the works when you're the only troublesome truck there." "Why have you been gone so long?" asked Fred. "Pah!" sputtered Rickety. "I wasn't damaged too badly, but every time a new engine arrived, the workman stopped repairing me and went to work on him. I should have been done months ago, but the engines are apparently more important than a good soul like me." The trucks murmured to each other. They had never liked the engines, and this was exactly the reason why. "Glad you're back where you belong," said Scruffy. "We've missed your company." "Thanks," said Rickety, "but who are those trucks?" "Oh, those are some new recruits," said Fred, "but they aren't too bright, if you get my meaning." "They don't know a single thing about causing trouble," said Scruffy crossly. "They like it when the engines bump them around. They think it's funny and they start to giggle." The trucks gasped. "How improper," murmured Rickety. "So I guess no accidents have been caused since I've been gone?" "A few of the older trucks pushed that new shunter into the ocean," said Scruffy. "But let's face it, these new trucks over here could have done the same thing. That Stafford doesn't know anything about pulling us freight cars around." "Then let's have some fun," said Rickety. "Show Stafford who's boss around here." The trucks agreed, and they began formulating new plans left and right. Unfortunately, they quickly realized that although Stafford didn't have the slightest clue about how to pull trains, he was the best shunter they had ever seen. "I can't believe I'm saying this," said Scruffy one day, "but I actually might just have some respect for Stafford." "Me too," said Rickety. "He's a funny-looking machine, but at least he doesn't bump us hard like Oliver would." "Ouch!" exclaimed the trucks as Ryan backed into them. "Come on, you dirty things," he muttered crossly. "The big engine's telling me that I can't go on strike. Huh! I'll show them." Did he just call us dirty things? Asked Rickety crossly. Who's this fellow? I'd like to show him a piece of my mind. His name's Ryan, said Scruffy. He said we could push him if we made Stafford crash into the sea, so it's about time we had some payback. I haven't shoved an engine off the rails in months, shouted Rickety. Let's do it! The trucks began forming a plan as Ryan pulled out of Knapford. They soon passed through the fire station near Bulgy's Bridge. Now's our chance, said Scruffy. Push, push, push! The trucks caught Ryan off guard and sent him down the hill and off the rails. The cars piled in behind him, creating a huge mess. We did it, shouted Rickety, and the rest of the trucks cheered happily. Ryan was crosser than ever. You silly trucks, he grumbled. What was that for? It was payback, you miserable engine, said Scruffy. Forget so soon, do you? Ryan remembered the innocent exchange between he and the trucks a few weeks earlier. Oh, dear, he mumbled. Sir Topham Hatt will surely send me away now. Just then, Ryan saw a ballast car sitting on the track near the drawbridge. That's it, he exclaimed. I'll tell Sir Topham Hatt that I ran into that truck on the way down the hill. Then he won't know that the trucks pushed me instead. It will be somebody else's fault, not mine. But when Sir Topham Hatt finally arrived, he was more intrigued with the car than with Ryan's crash. This looks strangely familiar, he muttered. That's probably because Ryan ran into it on the way down the hill, said Harvey. Likely a loose coupling from a previous train caused it to become derailed. Ryan smiled. My plan is working, he said quietly. I'm positive I've seen this car before, murmured Sir Topham Hatt. Just then, Captain arrived back from a patrol around the island. Nothing to report, sir, he said. Then he noticed the car. Sir, he shouted, do you know what that is? I think I do, exclaimed Sir Topham Hatt. That's the back car to the Sodor Railway repair. Indeed it is, said Captain. But I thought he was swept away, sir. He was, said Sir Topham Hatt, but it appears that this car was pushed up onto the land here by the tide. And if this small piece was swept away and floated back, then the same might occur for the Sodor Railway repair himself. Captain was overjoyed. I'll keep a lookout on my patrols, sir. Sir Topham Hatt turned to Ryan. And as for you, he said crossly, I'll have to deal with your lying smokestack later. I must attend to more important issues right now. Ryan realized his foolproof plan had indeed been fooled. While the trucks were happy at the mess they caused, Ryan was starting to lose track of all the messes he had created while on Sodor. Thomas the Tank Engine and Friends, Wooden Railway Adventures, Episode 171, The Mavis Matrix. One sunny afternoon, Mavis was on her way to the quarry when Jeremy suddenly swooped in and landed on the runway next to her. Hi, Jeremy, she said. You look in a hurry. What's going on? Quick, he panted. I'm carrying a very important passenger that Sir Topham Hatt needs to see immediately. Please go find him. Mavis was confused. Who is it? She asked. What's going on? Ah, Sir Topham Hatt, came the distinctive voice. Out stepped the railway inspector, who had visited the island a few months before. Mavis gasped. What's he doing back here? She wondered to herself. Oh, said the inspector, you're not Sir Topham Hatt. What's your name? Where's your controller? I'm Mavis, and I don't know where Sir Topham Hatt is, she said quickly. I'm going to go find him right now. Humph, grunted the railway inspector. Very well, then. I suppose I can wait here next to this noisy plane on this greasy runway. Good thing I'm not a plane inspector or else. Jeremy was cross, but decided it was wise not to say anything. Let me take you to him, said Mavis. It's better than standing here instead. That would be marvelous, cried the inspector. Onward, Davis! Mavis bristled at the incorrect name he had called her. The railway inspector climbed aboard and the two set off. On their way to find Sir Topham Hatt, Mavis rolled along a high viaduct overlooking a shabby and run-down area. Stop! shouted the inspector. What is this? Oh, said Mavis, this is the place where the Diesels like to go and rest. We call it the Diesel Works, but not a lot of work gets done here. Oh, it looks like Den and Norman are finally back from being repaired. The railway inspector looked at the ailing structure. Diesel Works indeed, he muttered. Very interesting. Mavis continued down the line until they finally ran into Sir Topham Hatt. He was inspecting the Duke and Duchess's house. "Ah, Mavis," he cried. "So nice to see you. What are you doing on this side of the island?" "Sir, there's someone I want you to meet," she said nervously. Sir Topham Hatt gasped as the railway inspector hopped out of Mavis's cab. "Sir Hatt," grunted the inspector, "nice to see you again." "As with you," mumbled Sir Topham Hatt. "What brings you to the island of Sodor again?"
"I've been sent to review your railroads and make sure everything is in order."
"But you were just here," replied Sir Topham Hatt. "Only a few months have passed since you last visited us. You gave us a wonderful review then, too."
"Indeed, and it appears your railway has fallen apart since I last departed," he murmured quickly. "That area over there you called the Diesel Works is horrendous. I will have to do something with that. And I was reading up on your accident reports on the flight here. I'm not impressed, to say the least."
"What does he mean, sir?" asked Mavis. Sir Topham Hatt sighed. "Every time there is a crash on a railway, the controller must report the accident to make sure that no one was hurt and that the engine is fully repaired."
"And I've noticed an alarming spike in accidents recently," interrupted the inspector. "Let's see. Montague, a.k.a. Duck, crashed into some cargo cars at Elsbridge Station. An electric shunter took a swim at the docks. And a visiting GNR locomotive seems to have a mean streak, with many accidents reported, some very recent, too."
"Oh, that's Ryan," explained Mavis. "He's a new engine, and a very inexperienced one at that."
"No excuses," said the inspector firmly. "Sir Topham Hatt, I'm here to make sure these crash numbers go down very soon, and by very soon I mean immediately. Your bumbling engines here are a risk to innocent passengers, and as the railway inspector, it is my order that you get these accidents under control."
"Yes," said Sir Topham Hatt, "that can be done. Well, thank you, Mr. Inspector. I'll see you back to the airport now."
"Oh, no," laughed the inspector. "I'm not leaving any time soon. I will be staying here on Sodor until the crashes are at a minimum. And you there," he said, pointing at Mavis, "you will be my private engine while I am here."
"Excuse me?" asked Mavis.
"Well, I must have some way of getting around," continued the inspector. "I certainly won't be seen climbing aboard one of those dreadful steam engines. These slide plates and snowplow on your front will provide me with extra protection."
Mavis rolled her eyes. "Are you sure you're a railway inspector?" she asked crossly. The railway inspector ignored her.
"And since I am staying for an undetermined length of time, I will need a place of residence."
"I beg your pardon?" asked Sir Topham Hatt.
"A house, Sir Hatt. I will need a place to stay."
Sir Topham Hatt was at a loss. The railway inspector had shown up uninvited to stay the next few months, and there were no preparations in place for him. "You can't be serious," objected Mavis. "I will not be your private engine, nor will you impose on Sir Topham Hatt like this. We have other important jobs to attend to, rather than showcase you around the island."
"Very well," said the inspector. "If you don't obey my orders, I will write a horrifyingly terrible review of this dump you call a railway, and it will be seized from your controller."
"You wouldn't want that to happen, would you? A dump of a railway!" cried Sir Topham Hatt. "The island of Sodor is a beautiful piece of railroading technology." "But not that part of Sodor," grinned the inspector, pointing to the diesel works behind the trees. "That's a work in progress," defended Sir Topham Hatt. "We're planning on turning that area into a resource center for the diesel engines on this railway."
"Perfect, then," said the inspector. "Since I won't be leaving any time soon, I will oversee this radical transformation you have in store. It will be quite easy for me to check in on the progress if I stay in this house right here."
Sir Topham Hatt and Mavis realized that since the Duke and Duchess were gone, the railway inspector could stay in their house. "Very well, then," said Sir Topham Hatt. "Welcome back to Sodor, Mr. Railway Inspector. I hope your time here is shorter than you anticipate."
"We'll see about that," chuckled the inspector. "Ah, Davis, please pick me up later today so I can take another tour of the railway. I seem to have forgotten everything since the last time I visited."
"It's Mavis," she grunted crossly, but the railway inspector was already inside. "I don't want to be that awful man's personal engine," she said to Sir Topham Hatt. "The only reason he's here is to destroy the Sodor Railway." "Don't worry," said Sir Topham Hatt. "He'll grow bored of traveling in a cab, so I'll arrange for a special coach to take him places. Please go alert all of the engines that the inspector is back and to be on your best behavior." Mavis quickly strolled away. She raced into the docks and hurriedly explained the situation. "The terrible man is back again!" exclaimed Bill. "We could have some fun with him, you know," chuckled Ben. "No games this time," said Mavis firmly. "The inspector already doesn't like Sodor, and he has a grudge against steam engines." "We need to keep the trains on time," agreed Boko, "and limit accidents to a minimum." The engines heard a splintering crash as Salty pushed some cargo cars into the back of Boko. "Sorry, me hearty," chuckled Salty. "I hope ye like the smell of fish." Boko sighed. "As I was saying, we need to stop having accidents, otherwise the inspector will give us a bad review." Suddenly, Isabella rushed in and overturned right in front of the engines. Her important package spilled across the track. "Whoops," she said. "I must have taken that corner too quickly." "Tell all of your friends what's going on," said Mavis. "Spread the news about the inspector as quickly as possible." "Ouch!" exclaimed Bulstrode as he beached himself near the exit of the docks. Victor surveyed the calamity around him. "And I wonder why the railway inspector wanted to come here?" he asked thoughtfully. All of the engines realized that Victor was right. The inspector had come for a reason, and they were in for trouble if they didn't change their hazardous ways. Thomas the Tank Engine and Friends, Wooden Railway Adventures, Episode 172, Gordon's Last Hurrah. The engines were waiting patiently at Knapford Station when Stepney puffed in with the railway inspector. "Watch your tongue," chuckled Duck to Gordon. "If that lousy man can become a railway inspector, so can I," he replied. "Oh dear, where is my clipboard?" asked the inspector. "I must have forgotten it at the summer house. You there, Stanley, go get it for me." "It's Stepney, and no, I won't," he said crossly. "I have passengers to pull, not run errands for you." Stepney puffed out of the station, leaving Gordon and the inspector behind. "Lousy steam engines," he muttered. "Oh, you must be Gordon. Yes, I've read a lot about you." Gordon felt very proud. "Like what, if I may ask?" "You fell into a ditch once." "Is that all anybody remembers about me?" he asked crossly. "Oh, no, you've had other accidents too," continued the inspector. "Your whistle became jammed, you lost your dome on a viaduct, you crashed through a station wall, tumbled down a hill, got caught in a monstrous snowdrift, ran into a tar tanker—" "That's enough," interrupted Gordon. "And most recently, you are the direct cause behind one of the biggest accidents in Sodor's history." "That small tender-bender in the yard?" asked Gordon innocently. "That was minor, if you ask me." "Not in my opinion," said the inspector sternly. "And I see you're still pulling coaches after all those crashes. Terrible, terrible mistake by Sir Topham Hatt. Because of your horrendous safety record and your lack of ability to keep your wheels on the rails, I will no longer permit you to pull the express. Today is your last day." Gordon was utterly shocked. The express was his pride and joy, and he couldn't imagine having to give it up forever. "How dare you?" said Gordon crossly, but the inspector wasn't listening. "I'm going to check on the yard here, and then I'm off to the docks. Goodbye," and he walked away. Gordon became very sad of the thought of never pulling the express again. Sir Topham Hatt stepped out of his office. "He can't be serious, sir?" asked Gordon. "I heard everything, and I'm very sorry, Gordon. Unfortunately, I have no authority over the railway inspector while he's here because he'll write a bad review if I don't do what he says. I'm sure he'll change his mind, but until then it looks like this will be your last hurrah." Gordon took a deep breath. "Yes, sir. I understand, sir." Sir Topham Hatt walked away as Gordon's passengers arrived at the station. "What's the matter, Gordon?" they asked. "You look very sad." "Oh, nothing," murmured Gordon. "I look sad because I thought you all weren't going to show up today." "Oh, silly Gordon," laughed the passengers. "We wouldn't miss your train for the world." The passengers climbed aboard and Gordon sighed. "If it's my last day of pulling the express, I'm going to do the best I can." And with that, Gordon steamed out of the station with his coaches in tow. Everywhere Gordon went, he was on time and the passengers were pleased. News had spread about the inspector's decision, and the other engines felt sorry for him. "I couldn't believe it when I heard the news," said Molly sadly. "I hope you have a good last day." Gordon smiled and pulled out of the station. At the end of the day, he finally arrived at the docks with the last of his passengers. "Well, this is it," he mumbled sadly. "It looks like my express pulling days are over." Even James, who was poised to take Gordon's place, felt sorry for him. "This isn't fair," he said to Gordon. "Once the inspector leaves, I'm sure you'll be able to pull the express again." "I'm not sure about that," said Edward. "The railway inspector has been strict so far, and it could mean disaster for the railway if Gordon gets caught doing it again." "Shh!" whispered Henry. "Here he comes." The railway inspector walked up and stopped on the track. "Ah, he's gone. Good. About time, too." "What is he talking about?" whispered Gordon. "I'm not sure," said James. "He obviously seems satisfied with something." Just then, Thomas rushed in with Sir Topham Hatt on board. Out stepped the controller of the railway, red in the face. "Mr. Inspector," he shouted, "what have you done?" "Ah, Sir Hatt," smiled the inspector. "Can I help you?" "No, I don't need any more help," said Sir Topham Hatt crossly. "Where has Victor gone? Thomas told me his boat was missing from the docks." "Oh, I sent him away," said the inspector calmly. "You what?" cried Thomas. "Why would you do that?" asked Edward. "Well, he was just sitting here on that boat of his, and he wasn't doing anything particularly productive, so I told him to leave, and he did." "But he wasn't supposed to leave," cried Sir Topham Hatt. "I was going to offer him a place on our narrow-gauge railway. His ship was too damaged to sail safely, so I was going to keep him." "Oh, the narrow-gauge engines," said the inspector happily. "I'm going to go see them." And he walked away, completely ignoring Sir Topham Hatt. The engines were shocked that Victor was gone. "His ship won't last long at sea with all that damage," said Henry. "Hopefully he'll turn around before it's too late." "We didn't even get to say goodbye," murmured Thomas. "He was a nice fellow, and I'm going to miss him." Gordon was crosser than ever. "Sir Topham Hatt, this inspector is causing nothing but problems for our railway. You have to do something." "I can't," said Sir Topham Hatt sadly. "If I disobey the inspector's orders, he's going to give us a bad review." "Who cares about a bad review?" continued Gordon. "Our passengers don't care about something like that. They've been riding on our trains for years, and they know we aren't exactly the safest engines out there. But they will still support us, I promise. This is your railway, and you give the orders." Sir Topham Hatt thought for a moment. "You're right. This is my railway, and I give the orders. And my first order is that you continue to pull the express, Gordon. I'll send Captain and Bulstrode out to look for Victor. Continue with your regular jobs, my good engines. That man may be the railway inspector, but I'm the controller of the Sodor Railway. I'm not scared of a man with a mustache and a clipboard." "That's the spirit, sir," whistled James, and the engines puffed away to finish their jobs. The railway inspector may have held the power to write a poor review, but the engines held the power of running one of the greatest railways in the world, and they were going to use it to their advantage. Thomas the Tank Engine and Friends, Wooden Railway Adventures, Episode 173, Percy Gets a Promotion. Toby and Daisy were preparing to leave Elsbridge Station one morning when Percy rolled wearily in. "What are you still doing out?" asked Daisy. "Did you just get back from pulling the mail?" "I'm not even done yet," moaned Percy. "I have 3 more stops to do." "Goodness me," said Toby, "and he's pulling a second mail car, too." "You're not going anywhere, Percy," interrupted Daisy. "Leave the mail coaches here and go rest. We'll find someone else to finish the job." Percy would have normally argued, but he was too tired to care. He puffed slowly away to the coal depot, where he found a siding and immediately fell asleep. Although it wasn't the quietest place on the island, Percy didn't mind. He was glad to finally get some well-needed rest. He awoke a few hours later to see Ryan puffing by with his mail cars. "What are you doing with those?" protested Percy. "Be nice to my coaches." "I am," said Ryan. "Sir Topham Hatt told me to finish your work since you were resting." "Oh," said Percy quietly. "I didn't know that. Thank you, by the way. I'm just hoping you'll stay on the rails this time. Ryan managed to smile. You become very quiet ever since the railway inspector arrived, continued Percy. Why is that? No reason, I suppose, said Ryan. I've realized Sir Topham Hatt has more to worry about than my silly antics. That railway inspector certainly is a cruel man. But do you still want to leave Sodor? Asked Percy. I think Sir Topham Hatt has completely forgotten about you. Don't worry, he hasn't, came the distinguished voice. Glad to see you're awake, Percy. Off you go, Ryan. Keep up the good work. Ryan smiled and puffed away. I hope you're well rested, Percy, because have I got a surprise for you. How would you like to go work up near Ulfstead Station for the time being? Percy was surprised. That sounds nice, he replied. I think you'll like it. I'm working on an expansion project, and I need an engine that can help the pack out with hauling supplies to and from the site. Will you be my engine, Percy? Of course, sir, he cried. It sounds like a very fun job. It is, and hopefully it will be a change of pace from pulling the mail. Let's see how Ryan fares this time. He hasn't been successful with trucks yet, but maybe this is the job he needs to prove he's really useful after all. When will you send him back? Asked Percy curiously. Sir Topham Hatt sighed. I think Ryan learned a lot when those trucks pushed him off the track. We'll see how he continues to do. But never mind about that. Off you go, Percy. Percy whistled happily and puffed away to his new job. The railway inspector stepped out from behind the corner as soon as Sir Topham Hatt left. An expansion project at Ulfstead Station? I must see what this is all about. Percy finally arrived on the other side of the island and stopped in awe as he gazed upon the pack hard at work. Well, this looks exciting, said Percy happily. Look who it is, cried Alfie. Welcome, Percy. Come to join us, have you? Yes, I have. I can't wait to get started. Let's get to work then, shouted Byron. Soon Percy was hauling supplies back and forth to the site. The work was hard, but progress was steadily made. Everyone was so preoccupied that they didn't notice the railway inspector sneaking about the construction site. Elevated track? A boisterous crane? No! This is going to take away attention from my diesel works renovation I promised Sir Topham Hatt. I must find a way to stop this at once. When Sir Topham Hatt came to inspect, he was very pleased at what he saw. Marvelous job, everyone, especially you, Percy. This promotion was one of the smartest things I've done. We're now ahead of schedule thanks to your help. Percy smiled, and the pack was very happy at the progress they were making. Even Thomas came by to view the project. Well done, Percy. You and your friends have done a spectacular job. Thanks, Thomas. See how much work you can get done when you don't have the railway inspector meddling in the middle of things? Oh, you don't have to tell me, replied Thomas. The inspector's been causing nothing but chaos back in the yard. Although I haven't seen him in quite a few days. I wonder where he's gone off to. Probably to check on Skarloey and his friends, smiled Percy. That's the only place he seems to approve of on the entire island. How is Ryan treating my mail cars, if I dare ask? Are they still in one piece? He's actually done an amazing job, replied Thomas. He's not pushy and blunt like he used to be. He simply does his work without fuss and is almost a really useful engine, chuckled Percy. Thomas smiled. He's getting there, that's for sure. I'll see you soon, Percy. Thomas puffed away and Percy set back to work. That evening the pack stopped digging at sunset and prepared for a night full of rest. Sleep tight, everyone, said Nelson. We've got a busy day tomorrow. See you all at the crack of dawn, laughed Isabella. Percy figured it was wise to spend the night at Ulfstead than to have to travel down to Tidmouth and back constantly. He quickly fell asleep, as did the rest of his friends. Everyone was so tired that they didn't hear the railway inspector walking through the construction site. They've made quite a bit of progress, he whispered to himself. This will overshadow the huge plans I have for the diesel works overhaul. I must figure out a way to set things back here a little bit so that my project becomes the focus. The inspector noticed the tall construction crane and scaled the ladder to the top. He climbed inside and slowly lowered the hook down to where the pack was sleeping. The wind was gently blowing the boom back and forth, and the inspector stepped outside to get a better look. "Blasted hook," he muttered. "I might be able to catch that crane down there."
Ho ho ho! A crane picking up a smaller crane. How funny am I?
Suddenly, a giant gust of wind blew up, and the arm swung around and hit the inspector off the ledge and into the back of Monty's dumper. The pack woke with a start. "What was that?" asked Jack. "It's the ghost excavator!" cried Patrick. "I'm getting out of here!" shouted Max, and he raced backwards. He immediately lost control and slammed into Isabella, which sent him over the castle wall in spectacular fashion. "Settle down!" shouted Percy. "What's that in the back of your dumper there, Monty?" Suddenly, the railway inspector stood up. He was gently rubbing his head. "Oh, dear! That's going to leave a bump for sure." Nelson noticed the crane's hook swaying very low to the ground. "The inspector was trying to operate the crane up there," he said. "He must have fallen and landed on top of Monty," cried Kelly. "But what was he doing up there?" asked Jack. "Something he wasn't supposed to be doing," said Percy crossly.
"How dare you falsify what took place here, you green caterpillar!" he shouted. "I was simply walking through the site here. There's nothing wrong with that."
"Then what were you doing on top of the crane?" asked Kelly. "Somebody help me!" cried Max. "I'm in a very uncomfortable position here." Eventually, Sir Topham had arrived at the site the next morning. The railway inspector refused to comment on what had happened. "Someone was trying to operate the crane," said Alfie. "That boom wasn't that low when we went to sleep."
"It must have been the wind,"
said the inspector mildly. "Or that wind you speak of could have knocked you off the top," retorted Alfie. "That's enough," said Sir Topham Hatt sternly. "Mr. Inspector, although I'm glad you're okay, you have no right to be walking through this construction site, day or night. As a man who constantly works around the dangers of railroad engines, you'd think someone like yourself would know that. In exchange for not turning you over to the authorities, I ask that you please release your grasp on this railway and allow us to return to normal operating procedures." The railway inspector realized that his snooping around had cost him big time. He hurriedly agreed to Sir Topham Hatt's demands and walked away. "So does that mean that the inspector is leaving?" asked Percy. "Not yet," said Sir Topham Hatt, "but it does mean that this man should allow us to do things the Sodor way again, on time and in a really useful fashion. With an accident here or there," chuckled Jack. The engines in Sir Topham Hatt shared a laugh. Although the railway inspector wasn't gone yet, he certainly wasn't going to be sneaking around any time soon. Thomas the Tank Engine and Friends, Wooden Railway Adventures, Episode 174, Henry's Handcar Havoc. "That's the last of 'em, me hearty," chuckled Salty. "Your train be ready to go." Henry smiled. "There's something special about pulling the flying kipper," he said quietly. "I guess it makes me feel important." "Well, don't let it go to your funnel," laughed James. "Every time you're in charge of something important, you always seem to mess it up." Henry became cross. "Like what?" he asked quickly. "You were supposed to pull the Queen's train, remember? And instead decided your boiler needed a fresh coat of white paint," said James cheekily. "Not to mention every time you pull the flying kipper, you always seem to find a way to leave the rails in dramatic fashion." Henry snorted. "For being the size of Edward, you certainly have an ego that could rival Gordon," he mumbled quietly. Just then, Ryan pulled in with the mail coaches. The engines immediately fell silent. "What's going on here?" he asked cheerfully. "Oh, the flying kipper. You better be careful, Henry." James rolled his eyes. "Would you stop with the jokes?" he asked crossly. "And how many times have you pulled such an important train as this?" asked Henry. Ryan's smile disappeared. "Oh, sorry," he said quietly. "I guess I should be going." "Yes, you should. And Percy wants his mail cars back," laughed James. "Don't listen to them, sailor," said Salty. "A moment ago they be laughing about like a pirate who just discovered his long-lost treasure chest. They'll warm up to you soon." "Thanks, Salty," murmured Ryan. "Hopefully sooner better than later." Eventually the guard's whistle blew and Henry pulled away with his long train. He barely made it out of the docks when he was forced to stop due to some unsafe track conditions. "The track here is warped due to the high water and you're too heavy, Henry," said his driver. "Looks like James will have to take the kipper this time." Henry was very cross at having to give up his favorite train. It was even more embarrassing when he saw Ryan at the turntable the next day. "You know, Henry," he said, smiling, "we've both successfully pulled the flying kipper the same amount of times in the last week." Henry pretended he hadn't heard. "You're so fat they might as well have a handcar head the train," continued Ryan. "At least then the flying kipper would be able to leave the docks next time." Henry felt insulted even though Ryan was only joking. Bill and Ben laughed and laughed. "You wait and see," said Henry. "I'll prove Ryan wrong, and then you two will be laughing at that instead." But Bill and Ben weren't convinced. "That tank engine sure showed you," chuckled Ben. The next day, Henry was waiting in the yard when Ryan arrived to pull Percy's train. There, sitting on the line, was a handcar. "All right, Ryan, since you think this is more valuable to this railway than I am, let's see how well it pulls the mail. Go ahead, Mr. Handcar, take Ryan's train and be off already." Ryan chuckled. "I was only joking, Henry, but you're a strange one all the same. How long did they leave you locked up in that tunnel again?" Stafford and Murdoch burst out laughing. Henry was so cross that he angrily bashed into the handcar. It went sailing down the rails and out of sight. "Uh-oh," murmured Murdoch. "You better go catch that," agreed Stafford. "That's the last thing the railway inspector needs to see. A runaway handcar on the main line." Henry realized he had made a big mistake. He immediately left the station in pursuit of the handcar. Further down the line, he stopped next to Neville, Molly, and Dennis. "Why are you out of breath?" asked Molly. "Did you see a handcar pass by here?" asked Henry quickly. "We did," said Dennis, "but I thought I was seeing things." "Me too," agreed Neville. "You don't normally see a handcar traveling down the rails with nobody aboard. It's going to be hard to stop now." Henry sighed. "How do you stop a runaway handcar?" he asked sadly. "I suppose you'll have to outrun it," said Dennis. "But I don't have any idea where it's gone," he insisted. "Maybe you'll get lucky and it will stop on a hill," said Molly optimistically. But Henry wasn't listening. He knew he had a long day ahead of him trying to catch an elusive handcar. Back at the station, Ryan was preparing to leave with his train when James rolled in. "Can you take my passengers?" he asked Edward. "I'm pulling the flying kipper again." "Really?" said Edward. "That's surprising. Usually Henry doesn't pass up the opportunity to pull the kipper, especially since the line has been rerouted to avoid the coastal track." "He can't pull it today," continued James. "Apparently he's still chasing a handcar around the island he bumped this morning. How silly of him." Ryan was surprised to hear that Henry still hadn't stopped the handcar. "Poor fellow," he murmured as he pulled away with the mail. On the other side of the island, Henry had given up. He rolled slowly into Great Waterton where Diesel was resting. "What are you doing up here in the hills?" asked Henry. "The more appropriate question is what are you doing here?" chuckled Diesel. "Still in search of your friend the handcar?" "You've heard about it too?" asked Henry sadly. "Oh, everyone's heard about it," smiled Diesel. "It will only be a matter of time before the railway inspector finds out as well. This will not look good on his report either." "You have to help me, Diesel," begged Henry. "You're not hiding it somewhere, are you?" "Oh, I haven't the slightest clue," chuckled Diesel. "You're in trouble and I haven't done a thing." Henry was at a loss at what to do. Sir Topham Hatt will surely send me back to the tunnel, he thought sadly. Suddenly, he found Ryan at the entrance to Elsbridge Station. "I heard you're still looking for the handcar," he said quietly. "I think it fell off the viaduct and it's in the diesel works over there." Henry looked over and saw the handcar off to the side of the turntable. Although it was damaged from the fall, it wasn't running around wildly on the rails anymore. "Wow, thank you, Ryan," said Henry. "But why would you help me, especially after I've treated you so poorly? We've all treated you poorly." "Well, I saw a friend in need and I couldn't sit idly by and not help," smiled Ryan. "A poor review by the railway inspector is worse than a grudge between two engines." Henry smiled at Ryan's comment. "You're quite the wise tank engine," he said happily. "I appreciate your help, and the next time I need some assistance getting up Gordon's Hill, I'll be sure to call on you to be my back engine." "That might not be a good combination," said Ryan. "Two of the most accident-prone engines working on the same train? That could mean disaster." Just then the railway inspector walked by. "Lousy Oafstead project," he murmured. "Oh, hello there. What are you two doing standing about? Is that a handcar on its side over there?" It nearly landed on me, shouted Norman from afar.
Oh, I'm not in the mood, grunted the inspector, but I'm sure you two have something to do with it.
And he walked away. Ryan and Henry couldn't help but chuckle. Well, everything's back to normal, said Henry. The inspector's still grumpy, he's blaming steam engines for all of the problems, and the rails are free from the handcar havoc, said Ryan happily, and the two friends puffed away, glad to put the day's events behind them. Thomas the Tank Engine and Friends, Wooden Railway Adventures, Episode 175, Rheneas and the Risky Rendezvous. The Skarloey Railway was preparing for another day of hard work when Sir Handel puffed in with some grave news. Fair warning to all, he said. Gordon told me this morning that the railway inspector is planning on visiting again later today. The engines groaned in unison. He comes here nearly every other day, said Peter Sam crossly. You'd think he has nothing to do. From what I've heard, chided Skarloey, he doesn't have much to do since he was caught sneaking around the Ulfsted project. So he comes to our line and bugs us instead? Retorted Peter Sam. We should feel lucky, interrupted Rusty. That railway inspector has been quite cruel to Sir Topham Hatt's engines. At least when he comes to take a look at us, he has nothing but high praise for our railway. Duncan wasn't convinced. You're only saying that because you're a diesel. He loves diesels. If he had it his way, he'd ship us all off to the scrapyard and buy 100 of your Rusties to replace us. Just then, Mavis rolled in with some quarry cars. I better not hear any complaining from you small ones, she said strictly. You don't know how much trouble he's caused the rest of us who have to deal with his antics every day. Oh, no complaining at all, murmured Duncan. You hear that, Peter Sam? No complaining from ya. Peter Sam rolled his eyes. Oh dear, here he comes, said Skarloey. The railway inspector walked up and faced the narrow-gauge engines. They could tell that he wasn't in a good mood. Righto, let's get started. You there, take me to the top of the mountain pass. I need some fresh air to clear the headache I received from all of this steam. The engines looked at each other. This wouldn't be a problem if you were all diesels, he muttered. Like this one. Hello, Dusty? It's Rusty, sir. Crusty, shouted the inspector. Actually, it's... never mind, murmured Rusty. The railway inspector stepped into Sir Handel's coach and the two were soon off. That was strange, murmured Peter Sam. No compliments from the railway inspector this time, agreed Skarloey. His affection has worn out on us, grumbled Duncan. Mavis chuckled. About time you joined the rest of the island in the misery, she smiled, and the railway inspector was indeed in a foul mood. When Sir Handel reached the top of the hill, he got out to stretch his legs. Blasted railway, he muttered. If Sir Fat Hat would only mind his own manners and stop getting suspicious. Oh dear, my head still hurts from that fall at the construction site. Sir Handel was getting impatient. I have trucks to take at the incline, he whistled. I'll take my time, retorted the inspector. You know, I have the power to write a review so horrible. We know, grunted Sir Handel. If you were actually serious about writing that horrible review you always mention, you would get it done and move on to the next railway and leave us alone. The railway inspector was cross at Sir Handel's tone. You watch your mouth, Eagle, he commanded. Eagle, grunted Sir Handel. That's not my name. But it was your first name, said the inspector. You were named after some bird, if I recall. Yes, a falcon, he shouted. There's a huge difference. Oh well, said the inspector. They should have called you Vulture with that attitude. Sir Handel finally snapped at the disrespect. He quickly sped down the hill and left the inspector at the top. Lousy steam engines, he muttered. This is certainly going on my review. Back at the incline, Duncan and Rheneas were working hard when Sir Handel puffed in. Where's the inspector? Asked Rheneas. I left him at the top of the hill, said Sir Handel crossly. You what? Cried the engines. You can't be serious, wheezed Duncan. I know you don't like him, but you can't just leave him wherever you please. What were you thinking, Sir Handel? Asked Rheneas. You're going to get in big trouble. The whole railway's going to get into trouble, agreed Madge. Sir Handel, you have to go set things right. I won't, he persisted. That man called me names. He said I was a vulture. Duncan and Madge quietly giggled. "It's not funny," he shouted crossly. Rheneas sighed. "Fine, I'll go see what I can do." He picked up an empty slate car and set off for the top of the hill. Just then, Paxton rolled in with Sir Topham Hatt on board. "Oh, Sir Handel," he said happily. "Well done on taking the inspector around the railway today. How did he like the climb to the top of the hill?" Sir Handel let off steam uncomfortably. "Oh, I don't think he liked it as much as you think, sir." Rheneas slowly worked his way to the top where the inspector was waiting impatiently. "Hello, Mr. Inspector," said Rheneas calmly. "I've come to take you back down."
"Oh, really?" said the inspector. "How surprising! I thought I was stuck up here forever on this blasted hill. I'm going to have a word with Ma'am Handel, or whatever his name is."
"My apologies," said Rheneas. "Let's get you back down to the quarry."
"Oh, no," said the railway inspector strictly. "I will not ride in the cab of a steam engine. They are filthy and vile."
Rheneas ignored the rude comment. "That's why I brought this slate truck. I know it's not luxurious, but all of our coaches are in use right now." The railway inspector laughed.
"You expect me to sit in that piece of rubbish? Dear me, I would rather stay up top here for a month than do that."
Rheneas was growing uncomfortable. The track beneath him seemed oddly unstable, and he figured it was because he had been standing still for so long. "Let's go, Mr. Inspector," he said quickly. "You can speak to Sir Topham Hatt when we arrive safely back down." But the inspector refused to move and pulled out his clipboard.
"I'm staying here and starting on my review," he said, smiling. "Chapter 1. How I was left stranded in the mountains of Sodor for the second time in recent months."
Suddenly, the mountain began to rumble as snow tumbled off the side. The track began to shake uncontrollably. "It's an avalanche!" cried Rheneas.
"An avalanche in September?" asked the inspector.
"Impossible!" Rheneas realized he was out of time. As soon as there was a break in the shaking, he lunged forward with the car and scooped the inspector off his feet. The two raced down the hill and eventually made their way back to the quarry where the engines were waiting.
"What was that for?" shouted the inspector. "You nearly ran me over."
"I was protecting you," argued Rheneas. "What I did was risky, and you should be thanking me. Your loud voice triggered that snowfall, and I barely got us out safely."
"I'll have you all scrapped, that's for sure," shouted the inspector. "Starting with you, for leaving me up there in the first place."
Sir Topham Hatt was appalled. "Mr. Railway Inspector, I apologize for the incident today, but Rheneas was only doing what was right. I just sent Freddy to inspect the tracks for avalanche damage, and he should be back soon."
"No need to. I don't want to hear the result. That's the final straw for me, Topham, and your railway is through for. I'll be submitting my review tomorrow and leaving shortly thereafter."
And the inspector walked quickly away. Sir Handel and Rheneas both felt terrible about their actions. "It's not your fault," insisted Sir Topham Hatt. "That man is a cruel one, and there's simply no way to please him. Get some rest, everyone. We have a long few days ahead of us." The engines were silent. "We did our best," murmured Skarloey. "We were nice to the inspector and catered to his every need. Even some of the most patient engines I've been around couldn't stand his attitude any longer. Cheer up, my dear companions." The Skarloey engines were very sad. What had started out as a promising day had quickly turned sour, and the review everyone had been dreading was finally on its way. Thomas the Tank Engine and Friends, Wooden Railway Adventures, Episode 176, If the Dome Fits. "It was scary," said Paxton to the other engines. The railway inspector had finally had enough, and told Sir Topham Hatt he was going to be submitting his review. "Then what happened?" asked James curiously. "He walked away, and that was that. The last I heard, the railway inspector went back to the Duke and Duchess's house. I think he's had enough of our railway." "And we've had enough of him," said Edward firmly. "How dare he treat Sir Handel and Rheneas like that?" "And the review's finally on its way," said Toby. "What do you think is going to happen?" "Hopefully nothing too serious," replied Daisy. "I don't want to lose my passengers." "They'll stick by us," said Gordon confidently. "At least my passengers will. They wouldn't possibly miss my express." "I wouldn't be so sure," said Edward. "We have to remain open-minded." Just then, Duck puffed in with his coaches. "Have any of you seen Oliver?" he asked quickly. "No," replied James. "He's not around the yard much ever since he went up to help Percy out at Ulfstead." "What's the matter?" asked Toby. "Do you need some help on your branch line?" "No, I don't," said Duck sternly. "I can handle the Little Western just fine. I don't need any help." The Injuns were surprised at Duck's attitude. "Did you hear about the railway inspector?" asked Daisy. Yes, he's submitting his review. Now I must be going." "But what do you think we should do?" asked Paxton. "Do you really want to know what I think?" replied Duck. "I think we should stop lying around the sheds, gossiping about something that doesn't matter. That's what I think." Duck puffed away, leaving the surprised engines behind in a cloud of steam. Daisy was offended. "How incredibly rude," she murmured. "I think Duck is a little stressed, to say the least," replied Gordon. "With Oliver gone at Ulfstead, he's had a lot of work to handle." "But that's why Sir Topham Hatt sent Ryan to help him," said James. "Those two don't exactly get along," countered Paxton, "even though Ryan has been very helpful lately." And the Injuns were right. Ryan was attempting to help Duck on the Little Western, but he was having none of it. "Ryan, I told you, you don't need to take these freight cars. I can handle it." "No, you can't," replied Ryan firmly. "You have coaches to pull." "I can take both," said Duck sternly. Ryan chuckled. "Your passengers won't be thrilled when there's ballast flying and cracking their windows." Duck was losing patience. "There are two ways of doing things, the Great Western way or the wrong way, and neither of them require your help." Duck stormed away and Ryan was left feeling dejected. "He probably doesn't want to work together because of our disagreement a few months ago," he said sadly. "If only I could prove to him that I'm willing to help." The next day, Duck arrived at Tidmouth Station to find Ryan waiting in a siding nearby. "Hello, Duck," he whistled cheerfully. "I'm here to be your back engine." "I don't need a back engine," shouted Duck crossly. "I can handle this train just fine." "But you're about to go up Gordon's Hill," protested Ryan. "Surely you'll need some help there." "I can manage, thank you," replied Duck. Sheesh, what an annoying little engine. Ryan was left feeling worse than before. "Cheer up," replied Stanley. "I had to help out on the Little Western a while back when Duck was at the works. He and Oliver have a very strange way of running things that only they understand. You'll get the hang of it eventually." Ryan was determined not to give up. "I'm sure Duck will need help with something eventually," he thought. "I'll just follow him around and jump in wherever I'm needed." Ryan quickly raced after Duck's train. Meanwhile, the Great Western engine was chugging along just fine. As he sped down the hill at top speed, he saw the railway inspector walking along the track just up ahead. "Look out!" shouted Duck. "Get out of the way!" Just as the two were about to collide, Duck veered into a siding and smashed headfirst into the back of the sheds.
"What on earth was that noise?" wondered the inspector. "This railway is too noisy for my liking."
"Help!" called Duck. "I'm stuck and the shed's filling with smoke."
"Oh my!" said the inspector as he turned around. "Yet another crash! Unbelievable! I'm going to put this on my report as well."
"You stupid inspector!" shouted Butch. "Get him out of there!" Just then, Ryan came down the hill. He was shocked at the mess that lay in front of him. "Duck," he shouted, "are you all right?" "I think so," came the muffled reply, "but there's smoke everywhere and I can't see a thing." And Duck was right. The sparks from his funnel as well as the spilled coals from the train were moments away from igniting. "Don't worry, I'll save you," shouted Ryan. Butch cleared the wrecked cars away from the track, and after much heaving and puffing, Ryan was able to pull Duck to safety. "Oh, thank you, Ryan," coughed Duck. "I couldn't move and you saved me." Ryan smiled. "You're welcome," he said wearily. Billy soon arrived with the fire department in tow. The sheds were quickly extinguished before a major blaze could break out. Sir Topham Hatt commended Ryan's actions. "Well done, Ryan," he said happily. "Your quick thinking saved Duck and these sheds from a rather nasty case of heat stroke. I'm so glad you elected to be Duck's back engine." "Pardon me, sir?" asked Ryan curiously. "A back engine," said Sir Topham Hatt. "You obviously helped Duck up the hill and followed him down the other side. That's the only way you got here so quickly." Ryan looked away shyly. Of course, sir. Meanwhile, the railway inspector had been watching the cleanup. Sir Topham Hatt noticed he seemed oddly unimpressed. You made it here rather quickly, Inspector. Did you see the crash from the Duke and Duchess's house? Huh? Questioned the inspector.
Oh, yes, I did. Quite a terrible wreck. This is going on my report, of course.
No, you won't, came a voice. Sir Topham Hatt and the railway inspector noticed Butch off to the side. He was walking on the track, sir, he said crossly. That's what caused Duck to hit the back of the sheds.
Oh, preposterous, laughed the inspector. Silly truck thing.
I'm a breakdown crane, and I'm not silly, said Butch firmly. He's right, agreed Duck. I remember what I saw. Just before I veered off the main line, I saw the inspector walking on the rails. You crashed on purpose to avoid hitting him, whispered Ryan. I suppose I did, said Duck, but I would have done this whole railway a huge favor had I not. Sir Topham Hatt was shocked. What were you doing on the track, Inspector? He asked curiously. Not only is it incredibly unsafe, but a man of your profession should also know better. The railway inspector looked away.
Just doing some routine maintenance checks on the sleepers, he murmured.
Duck and Ryan looked at each other. Something didn't quite add up. Sir Topham Hatt was not convinced either. Whatever you say, Mr. Inspector. The next morning, Ryan puffed into the yard to find Duck on a flatbed. He was going to be taken to the works for repairs. How are you feeling? Asked Ryan. Still got a bit of a cough, chuckled Duck. Smoke inhalation is a pesky thing. It could have been a lot worse, said Ryan. Yes, it could have, and I want to thank you again, said Duck. I've been rather gruff and rude lately, and I hope you understand that I'm sorry. You've changed a lot, and I sincerely hope that Sir Topham Hatt decides to let you stay. Ryan smiled. That means a lot coming from you, Mr. Waddle-Wheels, he said cheekily. Duck rolled his eyes. If the dome fits, wear it, I suppose. After that, Duck was taken to the works. The two engines realized what an incredible friendship had surprisingly formed over the past few months, and they were both going to miss each other very much. Thomas the Tank Engine and Friends, Wooden Railway Adventures, Episode 177, Bulgy Takes the High Road. Sir Topham Hatt's engines were waiting patiently at Knapford Station one morning. The clock was about to strike 8 and the platform was deserted. Where is everyone? Asked Thomas. All of our passengers are running late. They're not running late, grumbled Gordon. Our passengers aren't showing up at all today, and probably not for the next few days. Toby looked glumly at the clock. It's time for us to leave, he said sadly, and we have no passengers. Oh, look, here's some, cried Thomas happily. I don't care if the passengers don't show up, grunted James. They're always complaining about everything, it seems like. The passengers overheard what James said and immediately walked away. Well done, James, said Gordon. You scared away what little chance we had of pulling our trains today. This is appalling, agreed Thomas. Annie and Clarabelle aren't even half full. This reminds me of my old railway right before the end, said Toby sadly. There were fewer and fewer passengers until one day there were none. Just then Sir Topham Hatt walked up. He looked quite sad, too. Hello, everyone, he said quietly. If you couldn't tell it already, the railway inspector has finally released his review. It's all over the island by now, and I'm sure the passengers have seen it. Where have they all gone? Asked Toby. Well, they won't be riding in trains for a while, said Sir Topham Hatt. The inspector wasn't kind about what he thought of our railway, to say the least. Fortunately, I think Bertie and Bulgy will be able to handle the load today. I'm positive that over the next few days, the passengers will realize what a wonderful railway this is, and they'll gradually start choosing rails over roads again. The engines weren't happy still. I can't imagine how busy those buses are, wondered Gordon, and indeed they were busy. Bulgy and Bertie hadn't seen crowds like this in years. While Bertie was pleased at the attention he was getting, Bulgy was cross at the amount of traffic. Stupid nonsense, he grumbled. Come on, all of you. I'm going to break down with all of this weight I'm carrying. And he was grumpy for the rest of the day. The next morning, the passengers were still ignoring the platform and instead flocking to the buses stationed outside. It was Henry's turn to pull the express, and he was shocked. Gordon wasn't lying, he murmured. I'll only need one express coach today. I might as well leave Clarabelle, said Thomas sadly. There's no point in me carrying around an empty coach. Care for a race, Thomas? Chuckled Bertie. You're guaranteed to win, as I'll be stopping at every station while you can go right on through with your empty coaches. Thomas pretended he hadn't heard. Just then the railway inspector walked over next to the buses. He had a very sly look on his face. Yes, I was the one who wrote that review, he said loudly. No need to thank me. The passengers completely ignored him as they waited in line. Oh, no worries, he said confidently. They'll recognize me sooner or later. The engines looked on at the busy scene. It's ridiculous, complained James. We deserve to take those passengers, not cheeky Bertie and grumpy Bulgy. Toby laughed. What happened to yesterday's motto of who cares about the passengers? I was wrong. I was very wrong, said James. I'd rather have grumbling passengers than no passengers at all. The railway inspector noticed the banner on the side of Bulgy. Ah, the Anti-Rail League, he asked curiously. What's this all about? It's nothing, grunted Bulgy. Something I tried a few years ago that didn't work out. The railway inspector was fascinated with the idea. The Anti-Rail League, he repeated. That's what I've been saying this whole time. You are a very smart bus. Bulgy was flattered. He had never been praised so kindly before. I want to see what this Anti-Rail League thing is all about. Would you mind taking me around the island? Bulgy nearly popped a gasket. Absolutely, sir, he shouted. Come with me. Join the Anti-Rail League. The railway inspector hopped aboard and took up the front 2 rows, forcing some of the passengers to stay behind at the station. Now's our chance, said Thomas. Over here, come take a ride in our wonderful coaches. Things were beginning to look up for the engines. Later that day, when Bulgy arrived at Elsbridge Station, the railway inspector immediately hopped out. The platform there was deserted, too. I'll be right back, he said quickly, and darted inside. Bulgy became curious. He rarely saw anybody use that door nowadays. Doesn't that lead to Sir Topham Hatt's office? He wondered. What's that? Asked Sir Topham Hatt himself as he rounded the corner. Oh, nothing, grunted Bulgy. Nothing, sir. All right, then. You've done a very excellent job of keeping up with the extra demand. Maybe it's time you received a new coat of paint. And while we're at it, we should remove those old banners. I can't believe I've overlooked those all these years. Sir Topham Hatt walked away just as the railway inspector exited the station. Let's go, he said quickly. Take me to Suttery right away. Bulgy was surprised at the quick pace, but didn't question it. Back at the yard, the Diesels had arrived and were very cross. Sir Topham Hatt was trying to calm the situation. What seems to be the problem here? He asked loudly. The railway inspector is leaving today, grunted Airy. He promised us a new diesel works, shouted Bert. And we should hold him to it, agreed Den. Sir Topham Hatt sighed. The railway inspector is supposed to leave out of the airport later today, he said. But you're right. I won't let him leave this island until he fulfills his promise. The Diesels weren't convinced, but realized that Sir Topham Hatt was doing his best. Back at Suttery, the railway inspector had jumped inside the station, and Bulgy was waiting for him. Just then, Ryan puffed up. Oh, hello, Bulgy, he said. Wait, what's the inspector doing up there? That's Sir Topham Hatt's office. He's not supposed to be in there. The railway inspector leaped over the balcony and climbed into Bulgy. Onward, he cried. Bulgy quickly sped away, and Ryan chased after him. Back at Knapford, the Diesels were growing more impatient. Where's the railway inspector? Asked Norman. I can't find him, said Sir Topham Hatt. I don't know where he's gone. Look out, cried Thomas. Here comes Bulgy, and he's flying. Bulgy raced around the bend and climbed the Knapford Viaduct. He lost control and promptly tumbled off the edge to the track below. The passengers, cried Percy. A moment later, the railway inspector climbed out of one of the windows, rubbing his head. He was the only one aboard. You miserable bus, he shouted. You're no better than these terrible engines. Your Anti-Rail League slogans are, Well, they're disgraceful, disgusting, and... Despicable? Asked Henry. Yes, that too, shouted the inspector. Bulgy was very cross. You told me to drive fast. I was only doing what you were saying. Just then Ryan puffed in. He was glad that the railway inspector had been stopped. Mr. Inspector, boomed Sir Topham Hatt, before you leave, you need to keep your promise and update the diesel works. I have a bunch of angry diesels here who will not take no for an answer. The railway inspector laughed. I've already released my review. My work here is done. Goodbye, Topham, and the rest of you. Now where's my private engine? I'm going to miss my flight. That's it, said Sir Topham Hatt. If you're done here, then we are done with you. Enjoy that nice long walk to the airport, as I'm certain no engine of mine will be taking you there. The diesels and steam engines nodded in unison. No one would be taking the railway inspector anywhere. Very well then, good day, and he scuttled away to the airport. Good riddance, shouted Thomas. About time that horrible man left. And the rest of the engines whistled loudly as the terrible railway inspector finally disappeared from sight. Thomas the Tank Engine and Friends, Wooden Railway Adventures, Episode 178, The Mystery Train. Ryan sat glumly in a siding at the docks one morning. He was overworked, tired, and worst of all, he had witnessed the railway inspector going through Sir Topham Hatt's office at Sudbury Station a few days ago. Cheer up, me hearty, said Salty. You've got a strange look on your face. Someone steal your treasure, sailor? You could say that, murmured Ryan. I saw something a few days ago that worries me, and I need to tell Sir Topham Hatt about it. Then go and tell him, chuckled Salty. It's not that easy, he continued. Sir Topham Hatt's been really busy the past few days. The passengers are starting to return to the trains, the Ulfstead project is nearing completion, and now he's in charge of the diesel works renovation. He doesn't have time for my silly nonsense. Salty sniffed the sea air and sighed. I'm sure it will work itself out, me hearty. Just then Boko rolled in. They need you at Tidmouth Station, Ryan, he said. The guard told me there's going to be enough passengers to have a train today. Oh, bother, said Ryan. I have too much work to do. Ever since Duck went to the works, I've been running the Little Western all by myself. No, Oliver? Asked Salty. He's still up at Ulfstead with Percy, replied Ryan. Oh dear, this is going to be a busy day. Cheer up, said Boko. You're gaining a lot of experience out of this. Maybe Sir Topham Hatt will let you run your own branch line someday. That's if he lets me stay first, said Ryan. Sorry, Salty, but I won't be able to take these cars like I promised. No worries, said Salty. I'll have Bill and Ben take the train instead. Ryan puffed away and Salty went to go find the China Clay twins. They were playing games at the turntable near the sheds. I have a job for ye two, said Salty. Watch this, Salty, shouted Bill. He carefully moved a freight car onto the turntable and backed away. Leave me alone, said the grumpy freight car. Don't you dare bump me. I'll pay you out. Here goes, chuckled Ben, and he raced forward and hit the truck down the rails with a smash. The twins laughed at their silliness. Oh, bother, grunted Salty. I'll just find somebody else. Bill and Ben played games for the rest of the day and eventually acquired a nice stockpile of wrecked trucks. At sunset, they decided to venture to the docks to see what Salty needed. Where's Pirate Boy? Asked Ben. He's gone for the evening, replied Cranky. He wanted you two to take that train right there. Apparently it's for the diesel works renovation, and it needs to get there by morning. Sounds like a peculiar thing, said Bill cheekily. Let's take it tonight, agreed Ben. We can go the long way around the island to the diesel works, since it doesn't need to be there by morning. The twins were very excited about their joint train. Just then, Stafford raced in and screeched to a stop. You look in a hurry, said Bill. I am, replied Stafford. Apparently, the passengers are returning to the trains quicker than expected, and I'm going to need help in the yard to handle the shunting duties. Will one of you please help me prepare for the big rush tomorrow? Bill and Ben didn't like being separated, but figured it was the right thing to do. I'll go help Stafford, said Bill. Have fun pulling the train, Ben. The two engines left the docks, and Ben was coupled up to the heavy cars. "You be careful out there," said Cranky. "There might be a ghost engine waiting for you on the main line." Ben laughed. "I'm not scared of your stories, Cranky. I can manage just fine." With a long whistle and a big puff, Ben chuffed slowly out of the docks. He quickly made his way past Marin Station and onto the long viaduct near the Vickerstown rolling bridge. The fog had settled in nicely, and Ben was struggling to see where he was going. "Where's the bridge?" he wondered. "This fog's so dense, I can't see anything." Just then, Ben heard a noise coming closer and closer to him. "What's that?" he gasped. "Bill? Mr. Ghost Engine? Show yourself!" But the engine remained silent and quickly set to work. The next morning, Thomas left Knapford Station with his coaches packed to the brim. "It's so nice to have the passengers back," he said to Annie and Clarabelle. "That just shows that the railway inspector can't tarnish Sodor forever." Just then, Thomas came to a screeching halt. He was surprised to see an abandoned caboose sitting on the line. "What's this doing here?" wondered Thomas. "It looks like it's from a train, but there isn't a train to be seen." Thomas carefully pushed the caboose to Marin Station where his passengers disembarked. Salty was preparing to head to the docks, and he noticed the brake van. "What are you doing with that, Thomas?" "That's the caboose from Bill and Ben's train. I remember because it had a big nick on the back of it, like this one does. It's supposed to be at the diesel works." "I found it on the line near the Vickerstown rolling bridge," replied Thomas. "It hasn't been to the diesel works, that's for sure." Salty and Thomas looked curiously at the mysterious brake van. Back at the yard, Bill was frantic. The engines were trying to calm him down. "He's gone! Ben's gone!" he shrieked. "I was waiting for him at the diesel works this morning after I finished here in the yard, and he never showed up." "It's going to be all right," said Edward. "Ben is probably just playing a joke on you, and he's hiding somewhere. You should go look for him. Maybe try the China Clay Works, will you? I've already been there, but I guess I'll try again." And Bill puffed sadly away. "What's going on?" asked Thomas. "That's the third time I've sent him to go look for Ben," said Edward wearily. "I don't know what else to do." "The poor engine is in a frenzy," said Ryan. "Apparently Ben was supposed to take a trip to the diesel works last night, and he hasn't been seen since. To make matters worse, Bill insists that Ben took the long way around the island for some reason," continued Edward. "That route would have taken him past Marin Station to the Vickerstown rolling bridge, and there are so many lines to check over there." Thomas suddenly let off steam. "I was just at the Vickerstown rolling bridge," he exclaimed. "The caboose from Ben's train was sitting on the line this morning. I just showed it to Salty a moment ago at Marin Station." "We need to find Sir Topham Hatt," agreed Edward. "Something strange is going on here." "I'll go find him," said Ryan quickly. "I can tell him about Ben and the railway inspector at the same time." He finally found Sir Topham Hatt talking with James near the sheds. "Yes, those are some valid points, James," he said. "Both Ryan and Stafford are qualified engines, but I can't keep them both. Ryan was meant to be temporary and only assist until Duck returned from his accident." "But now Duck is at the works again," interrupted James, "and sending Stafford away will only cause confusion and delay in the yard. Who will fill his spot?" Yes, but Ryan is the only one running the Little Western right now," said Sir Topham Hatt, "and he does deserve some type of reward for saving Duck." "Oh, dear me, this is going to be a tough decision. Oh, hello, Ryan. I didn't see you there." "Hello, sir," said Ryan anxiously. "I know you're busy, but I have something to tell you." "No time for that," said Sir Topham Hatt quickly. "I must go to the diesel works and inspect the equipment that was delivered from the docks last night. If I don't show up soon, Diesel and his friends are going to cause some serious trouble. I'll speak to you later today." Ryan was so shy and bothered that he quickly puffed away without saying a word. "I hope he didn't hear too much," said Sir Topham Hatt. "Trying to decide which engine to send away is going to be difficult." "I'm sure you'll make the right choice, sir," replied James. Just then Salty rolled into the yard. "Sir, there be some trouble going on," he panted. "Ben left with the Diesel Works train last night and hasn't been seen since. Thomas found his caboose on the line near the Vickerstown rolling bridge this morning. It appears one of our China Clay twins be missing, sir." James gasped at the news. Sir Topham Hatt was shocked as well. In his hastiness, he had completely disregarded Ryan and was now left wondering if his message contained anything regarding Ben's disappearance. "Well, that won't do," he murmured. "Right away, let's go solve this mystery." And Sir Topham Hatt climbed into Salty's cab and the two rolled away to the Diesel Works. Thomas the Tank Engine and Friends, Wooden Railway Adventures, Episode 179, Sydney the Renegade. Sir Topham Hatt and Salty rolled into the Diesel Works that afternoon. The controller of the railway stepped out and gazed at the haphazard state of the facility. "Sir Topham Hatt," gasped Daisy, "what are you doing here?" "I have some unfortunate news," he replied. "I ordered the parts and equipment necessary for the Diesel Works renovation, and they were all delivered to the docks last night. Unfortunately, I sent Ben to take the train, and he has gone missing along with all of the supplies." "Huh," grunted Bert. "Leave it to a steamy to lose our cargo." "How rude of you, Bert," interrupted Paxton. "The supplies should be the least of our worries. An engine has gone missing." "I'm sorry to say that the upgrades I promised you all will have to be put on hold for a while," continued Sir Topham Hatt. "Finding Ben is my priority. Parts are replaceable. Good engines like him are not." Sir Topham Hatt walked away and the Diesels groaned. "It's a shame that Ben's missing, but why should we have to suffer?" said Norman. "Yeah," agreed Airy. "The railway inspector ignored us for months, and now Sir Topham Hatt's going to do the same. Diesel, what do you think we should do?" Diesel sat silently for a moment before speaking. "We Diesels don't ask for much," he muttered. "We do the dirtiest work of the railway, yet we receive no respect. It's time to open Sir Topham Hatt's eyes to the fact that there's a place not far from here where Diesels are treated properly. If the upgrades get put on hold again, I say we go on strike. It's the only way to get his attention." The Diesels agreed to the plan. Later that evening, Thomas and his friends had just finished pulling their final trains of the day when Henry spoke up. "Did you hear the news?" he asked quickly. "What news?" asked Edward. "Sir Topham Hatt has decided which engine he's going to send away," replied Henry. "He can't keep both Stafford and Ryan, and I guess he's made a decision." "This is a terrible situation," said Thomas sadly. "They're both really nice engines and have earned the right to stay." "But there are too many engines on Sodor," said Gordon firmly. "Sir Topham Hatt can't let every engine that ever visited stay as long as they want." "Not to mention how pointless all of those extra engines would be," agreed James. "Oh, I know what we should do," cried Percy. "We should talk to Sir Topham Hatt about a desperation." The engines groaned loudly. "Percy, we've been over this," said Thomas. "It's a deputation, not a desperation." "Sorry," mumbled Percy. "I was only trying to help." "Percy's got a point," said Edward. "It's down to either Ryan or Stafford that is getting sent away, and I don't think anything is going to sway Sir Topham Hatt's mind." The news spread quickly around the island, even to the two engines involved in the situation. "Well, the day has come," said Stafford quietly. "One of us is getting sent away very soon." "Indeed," murmured Ryan, "but you shouldn't have to worry. I'm sure it's going to be me. I was so rude to everyone when I arrived and have caused a lot of trouble for the railway." "Don't say that," replied Stafford. "I'm too funny-looking, and my battery needs to recharge quite frequently. There are too many things wrong with me for Sir Topham Hatt to let me stay." Ryan became sad at the thought of leaving and puffed away to get some fresh air. The full moon lit his way as he puffed down the tracks of Sodor. "What am I thinking?" he said to himself. "There's no way Sir Topham Hatt lets me stay. Plus, the island needs Stafford, otherwise there won't be anyone left to shunt in the yard. The answer here is clear. I must leave the railway so that Stafford can stay. It's only fair to him, and I'll save Sir Topham Hatt the trouble of deciding. There has to be a way off this island somehow." Ryan had decided to run away. Just as dawn was breaking, he came to a screeching halt at the bottom of the hill. There lay a derailed Diesel on a strange-looking car off to the side of the track. "What happened here?" cried Ryan. "Please, get help," said the engine. "I need to get back on the tracks immediately." Not until you tell me who you are, said Ryan firmly. I don't recognize your face. You're obviously not one of Sir Topham Hatt's engines. I'm not, confessed the Diesel. I was out for a midnight stroll and that car was sitting on the line over there. I smashed into it and rolled right off the rails. Now can you please help me? Ryan still wanted to run away and saw that the bridge was clear. I'm sorry, but I can't, he said to the Diesel. I'm leaving the Sodor Railway now. I'm sure another engine will be along shortly and they'll be able to help you. Where do you think you're going? Asked the engine. Over the drawbridge to the mainland? You must be joking. Ryan became cross. I'll have you know it was my decision to leave. Sir Topham Hatt is not sending me away. No, not that, said the Diesel. The other railway is not the place to go, especially for a steam engine like you. Ryan rolled his eyes. Thank you for questioning my motives, but I've already made up my mind. Now, if you'll excuse me... Ryan, said the engine. That's your name, isn't it? I saw it on your boiler there. I'm begging you not to go over that drawbridge. What you'll find on the other side is not what you're expecting. Ryan became curious. What are you doing over here, then? He asked firmly. I'm running away, just like you are. My name's Sydney. I've been to Sodor a few times, but I've finally made up my mind that this is where I want to stay. Take my advice. If you cross that bridge, they'll take your coal, strip away your paint, and put you on a siding for scrap. I've seen it happen. In fact, they just caught a small engine trespassing a few days ago. Oh, what was his name? Bob? No. Oh, no, it was Ben. Ben? Cried Ryan. You know about Ben? Yes, said Sydney curiously. How do you know him? He's a Sodor engine, exclaimed Ryan. He's being sent for scrap? I'm not sure, replied Sydney. Those other Diesels are terrible. That's why I don't want to be with them anymore. We have to tell Sir Topham Hatt, said Ryan quickly. Ben's in danger and we need to save him. No, said Sydney quietly. You can't tell Sir Topham Hatt because he'll know that I'm here. Just go get a breakdown crane and put me back on the rails and I'll be out of your way in no time. And where is the Diesel Works located from here? No, I can't do that, said Ryan. I was seconds away from not being a Sodor engine, but as of right now, I still work for Sir Topham Hatt. Sorry, Sydney, but you'll have to wait until he arrives. Ryan began to back away when he noticed the strange car off to the side again. That's the second car that's been washed up on these tracks here recently, he murmured, and what a peculiar one at that. Just then, Ryan looked towards the drawbridge and gasped at what he saw. Oh my, he whispered, this is huge. I need to go find Sir Topham Hatt immediately. And Ryan rushed away as fast as his wheels could carry him. Thomas the Tank Engine and Friends, Wooden Railway Adventures, Episode 180, Vickerstown Takedown. The next morning, Sir Topham Hatt stopped by the sheds to make an important announcement. After much thought, he said happily, I have decided to keep both Stafford and Ryan on the railway. The engines were quite shocked by the news. I thought you were going to send one of them away, sir, asked Toby. What happened? Well, they both worked very hard, so I thought it would be appropriate if they were rewarded. Ah, Stafford, thanks for joining us. I'm happy to announce that you'll be staying with us here on Sodor. Stafford was pleasantly surprised. Oh, wow, he gasped. Thank you, sir. But what about Ryan? He will be staying as well, said Sir Topham Hatt, although I can't for the life of me figure out where he's gone. Ah, Ryan, there you are. I have some excellent news to tell you. Sir Topham Hatt, he cried, there's trouble down at the Vickerstown rolling bridge. Big trouble. Why, what's the matter? Asked Sir Topham Hatt curiously. There's a Diesel from the other railway that's derailed by the tracks, sir. And there's something else going on, too. The engines gasped at the news. It's an invasion, cried Henry. Calm down, said Sir Topham Hatt. I'm sure there's an explanation to this. We'll worry about that Diesel in no time. Come celebrate with us, Ryan. I'm happy to announce that you're... Sir, please, shouted Ryan. Ben's been taken to the other railway for scrap. Everyone immediately fell silent. What did you just say? Asked Sir Topham Hatt. I said that Ben is trapped on the other railway and they're going to scrap him, sir. That's what the diesel by the tracks told me. Sir Topham Hatt's happy expression quickly turned stoic. "Take me there, now," he said, and Ryan puffed quickly away. The two arrived to find Sidney derailed by the side of the line, as well as something else equally surprising. "What is this?" said Sir Topham Hatt. "What are you all doing here?" There were steam engines lined up on the tracks preparing to enter Sodor. "Who are you all?" asked Sir Topham Hatt. "What do you think you're all doing, trying to enter my railway?" "Apologies, sir," said the engine. "My name is Hero, this is Connor, and that's Caitlin. We work for the mainland railway." "Well, I can see that," exclaimed Sir Topham Hatt. "And why are you all here this morning? Are those passengers?" "Yes," replied Connor. "We're simply obeying orders, sir." "What orders?" asked Sir Topham Hatt. "The ones you sent us a few days ago," said Caitlin. "You sent a telegram to our railway saying we could bring passengers and rolling stock over the bridge starting today." "Preposterous!" shouted Sir Topham Hatt. "I did no such thing. Now, please, go back to where you came from. I do not allow mainland engines to simply puff across the Vickerstown rolling bridge whenever they feel like it." Just then, Ryan remembered what he saw a few days ago. The railway inspector had been going through Sir Topham Hatt's office at Suttery Station. "Sir, they're right," he said. "Someone did approve of this." "Well, who was it?" asked Sir Topham Hatt. "Because it obviously wasn't me." "You're right," said Ryan. "It was the railway inspector. I tried to tell you this, but you ignored me, sir. I saw him at your office at Suttery Station a few days ago, right before he left." Sir Topham Hatt was shocked. "So this is how the inspector repays me," he muttered. "He sent a message to the other railway and approved of these mainland engines to come visit me." "Why don't you let other engines across the bridge anyway?" asked Ryan. "Ever since Diesel 10 started playing games with our railway, I've restricted the travel of engines across this bridge for security reasons. It appears that the railway inspector decided to change this, as he knew it would cause confusion and delay." "I don't mean to rush you, sir," said Hero, "but could you please let us onto your railway? Connor and Caitlin's passengers are not going to be pleased if they're late." "Where are those passengers going to go to?" asked Sir Topham Hatt. "There's no room on the itinerary." "Just to Vickerstown Station, that's all," said Connor. "We don't want to impose more on your railway than we already have." Sir Topham Hatt couldn't believe this turn of events. Suddenly, engines from the other railway were going to be crossing the bridge and entering Sodor whenever they felt like it. "Very well," said Sir Topham Hatt. "I can't turn away the passengers because we need as many people as possible riding on our trains, due to the inspector's terrible review." "And what about Sidney here?" asked Ryan. "Indeed," said Sir Topham Hatt. "What are you doing here again, old friend?" Sidney chuckled. "I've decided that the other railway is no longer the place for me. I was wondering if I could join yours. I know I've made some bad decisions in the past, but I'm ready for a fresh start." Sir Topham Hatt wasn't convinced, but he didn't have much of a choice. "I suppose since I'm letting all of these engines in, it would be rude of me not to extend the invite to you. And I see you found the second car to the Sodor Railway repair while you were at it." "The what?" asked Sidney. "Who's that?" agreed Ryan. "Nothing," said Sir Topham Hatt quietly. "But it appears there's still some hope for our good old friend. Very well, then. Welcome, Hero, Connor, Caitlin, and Sidney. I presume we're going to meet more of your friends in the coming days?" "Not too many," replied Hero. "There aren't too many steam engines left on our railway now that the diesels are in charge." Just then, Ryan remembered why he found Sir Topham Hatt in the first place. "Sir, what about Ben?" he asked quickly. "We'll get him out of there, don't worry. Now let's get this mess cleaned up and alert the other engines to our new arrivals." The news spread rapidly around Sodor. The engines couldn't believe what they were hearing. "This is nothing but trouble," said Edward. "For years, Sir Topham Hatt hasn't allowed engines from the other railway on to Sodor. I guess that's all about to change now." "Terrible decision," remarked Donald. "It would be a free-for-all, let me tell you." "You know what this means," said Thomas quietly. "With a clear bridge to the island of Sodor, Diesel 10 could be plotting something very sinister." And his friends could be up to trouble too, agreed Stepney. That Sydney fellow could just be a decoy for something bigger that's going on. What are we going to do? Asked James. We were worried that Stafford and Ryan were going to get sent away, but with all of these new engines coming to the island, they might take our jobs and we could all be sent packing. Don't forget about Ben, said Donald. He needs rescuing too. Sir Topham Hatt's engines were mightily scared of what lay ahead. That evening, Oliver and Toad puffed up to the Vickerstown rolling bridge. Mr. Oliver, I reckon we shouldn't be over near this part of the island. One of those big mainland engines might come zooming over that bridge and squash us. Oliver wasn't fazed, however. There's something going on over there, Toad. Something pretty important. I don't know what it is, but I'm going to find out.